Reddit, what is the scariest thing you have ever witnessed? I got a call from a girl in my class, who I wasn't really friends. It was 2 a.m. and she was crying and crying. I couldn't understand a word she was saying, so I said I'll be there in 5 and went to her house. When I got there I found her lying in the front garden with her wrists cut open and still crying. She's fine now, but the image of her lying in the garden, blood everywhere and crying, will stick with me forever. When I was in PNG a few weeks ago with a school group, we were driving through Mount Hagen during a protest. Saw a small girl, probably about 4 years old, get run over by a 4-wheel drive. Her head just kind of exploded, and her neck was bent backwards at a 90-degree angle. Never talked to anyone about it afterwards, but don't think I'll forget about it anytime soon. Seeing a guy jump off of the Golden Gate Bridge less than 10 foot in front of me. He just looked over, we made eye contact, then he just climbed over and was gone. I was super messed up for the rest of that trip cause of that. I was born in former Yugoslavia. My father ran a business in Germany at the time when the conflict in the Balkans began. My mother got me and my 2 brothers out of the war into Germany to meet up with my dad. Anyway, my first memory is being in the bed of a large truck being shot at by tracer rounds. I can still remember the sound of bullets hitting steel. There was a time when a baby was dead and a mother ran out to the sidewalk to get to the ambulance faster, then laid the baby on the ground. I remember walking up to the baby and that scary silence had surrounded me as the crowd that had formed was speechless. Came to find out that the baby's 2-year-old brother shoved a screw in her mouth that went down her throat. As I drove to the hospital, all I can remember is the mother's sobs and telling the police to send a car to protect that 2-year-old from any family member that might have been ready to make a terrible emotional mistake. Someone's abdominal incision opening up after I took her sutures out. Pressure in her belly caused her intestines and bowel to spill out onto the bed. I was in my 2nd year of nursing school, and it was the very first time I ever took out sutures. Also, countless postpartum hemorrhages. Never gets less scary. When I was about 13 years old, I was playing with my 5-year-old brother at the beach. Suddenly a big wave hits us, and he is gone. A random stranger felt my brother hit his legs underwater and pulled him up 15 seconds later. Edit. Yes, he is fine, but he does say that it is a pretty vivid memory of his. Neighbor boy getting attacked by a Saint Bernard. I was 6 and there was so much blood. Having the police come to my door to tell me my father had been killed. March 17, 2012. I was like 14 and up late watching scary movies in my room. Naturally I was a little on edge and for no reason I decided to look out of my window into my backyard. The instant I glanced past the blinds, a man walks by in my backyard. I fell backwards through my door and sprinted upstairs. It was just some dude cutting through my backyard for whatever reason, but it still makes me nervous to think about. My daughter having a seizure only lasted maybe 15 seconds, but they were the longest 15 seconds of my life. Terrified doesn't even begin to describe it. I had sleep paralysis once. I saw my own head. Doesn't seem scary, but in sleep paralysis, everything is. Nothing. Literally sitting in my living room with nothing to scare me at all. No sounds, no movement, nothing. Scares the daylights out of me. Being merged into by an 18-wheeler at 70 miles per hour in 4 lanes of steady traffic. It was on 285 outside Atlanta at around 10:30 on a Friday night. I was in the passenger seat leaning forward to get a map, and as I started to come back up I saw through the driver's side window that something was just *WRONG*. I ducked back down, and the world ended. I was suddenly going sideways and everything was made of noise and nothing made sense. In the moment there was no fear, just the absolute certainty that I was going to die, and there was nothing that could be done about it. We ended up smashed perpendicular to the wall dividing the opposing lanes of traffic, and the woman who had been asleep across the back seat was draped across me. The driver, my friend who was 18 at the time, 2 years older than me, was about an inch away from having his head crushed by the side of the car. It was after it was all over that the fear set in. I watched a social media / link aggregator site attempt to sleuth its way through a bombing that occurred in a major US city and destroy the life of an innocent family while congratulating themselves for a job well done after accusing the wrong person. The scariest part is that they forgot about it very nearly instantly, and though they say they are very sorry and it won't happen again, it is essentially guaranteed to happen again because of the nature of the community and the medium in which they communicate. Rock climber here. Rappelling off of the top of a route, my boss accidentally misclipped the rope, so the rope was fed through the device but not secured. She began to make her descent and weight the rope, and it popped out. Boss Ash 2 freaked out and stopped Boss Ash 1 before she had the chance to fall. She was on this cozy ledge that she had to walk off to commit to the rappel. Boss Ash 2 watched the rope fall through the device and stopped Boss Ash 1, preventing her death. Edit. My 2 AM brain recovering from a 6-hour drive can't create proper syntax. Sorry for the confusion, y'all. Something that stuck with me was like a little over a year ago. I was at a family friend's house to see her husband who has cancer. After this sad day it was time to go. When we started through the door and she begged us to stay 5 minutes, we obliged and stayed 5 minutes and then left. Well, as we got on the highway we hit huge amounts of traffic, only to find a drunk driver went on the wrong side of the road and had flipped over the median and was upside down. We pulled over, and my dad, being a cop, ran to the turned over car to help others get the driver out. He told me to go further up the road where two cars had been heavily damaged, where I found someone whose head was smashed in and brain matter hanging out. As I got the passenger out of that car, who was still alive, and sit her down, she eventually died pretty much in my arms. This was the scariest thing, but the kicker is we missed the accident by 5 minutes, so I thought that was strange too. Watching my mom's lip suddenly burst open while she was driving. There was blood everywhere, and I had no idea what was going on. Even today we still don't know why it happened. When I was a kid, I lived in one of the oldest pubs in the UK. It was an old inn, so it had around 20 rooms. Being so old, it had really thick, heavy iron banded doors. Anyway, one day my brother-in-law was minding me in the nursery, which was at the end of the corridor on the upper floor. We hear some doors open, and assuming my parents are home, I rush into the corridor, brother in tow. Every door was open. Then they started to slam shut, one by one, with such force the door frames are splintering. They started shutting from the opposite end and came towards us. My brother-in-law grabs me and shuts the nursery door, locking it. We hear all the doors shut and then footsteps like someone was running up and down the corridor. Big, heavy footsteps like thunder. Then the door to the nursery gets beaten and smacked, shaking on its hinges. We cowered in there for hours after it stopped. I have too. Traveling through villages and down the Croatian coast in the early 90s as a kid, hearing / seeing the absence of people and the remnants of war, blown up houses / makeshift bridges, stuff strewn around, fronts of houses missing with furniture and stuff still inside, the sound of gunshots echoing at night, UN soldiers at checkpoints, disorder, disarray, an unimaginable feeling of gloom, fear, and sorrow. Being mugged, seeing the shadow and sync with mine, and then feeling the weight of a human bring me down to the ground, not being able to move my arms. Lightning struck the neighbor's house when we were all outside taunting it with coat hangers and holding on to an aluminium structure. We don't taunt it anymore. July 20th, 1970. Hinkai Young burns himself to death in Times Square. Thought someone had burned a mannequin in the street. Just about shat myself when I realized it was no mannequin. Amateur fireworks in the campground after a concert. Drunk knocked over the tube before the mortar shot across the ground through the crowd of people streaming along the path. The mortar stops under an RV and explodes in a crowd of people. Unlikely, but I thought the damn thing was going to explode like in a movie or something. A friend of mine hitchhiked across Canada, and one of the guys that picked him up said he would drive him as far as he could, but he had to stop at a graveyard and put flowers on his friend's grave that had passed years before. When they arrived at the graveyard, the name on the tombstone was the same as my friend who was hitching a ride. Probably a car pulling out in front of me while I was going 60 miles per hour down a highway. I made eye contact with the woman in the car that I hit for a split second, slammed on the brakes and screamed. I bashed into her car and my airbags exploded, and everything was wavy and shaky. Both of us escaped with minor injuries, but my brand new Jetta was totaled. I guess I just realized how easy it would be to have just died in that instant, and it scared me.